the bright idea. Mark had always been driven. Fresh out of journalism school, he landed a job at the city's most respected newspaper, The Chronicle. He wasn't content with writing obituaries or covering local council meetings. Mark craved the front page. He wanted a story that would make people stop and think, a story that would change the world, or at least the city's perspective. One day, during a particularly dull editorial meeting, the editor, Mrs. Davies, bemoaned the public's apathy towards the growing homeless population. "Nobody cares," she sighed. "They see them every day, step over them and pretend they don't exist." That's when the idea struck Mark. Bold, audacious, and maybe a little reckless, he would go undercover as a homeless person. He would live on the streets, experience their hardships, their hunger, their constant fear. He would write a series of articles that would expose the brutal reality of homelessness and force the city to confront its indifference. He pitched the idea to Mrs. Davies, fully expecting her to dismiss it as too dangerous, too sensational. But to his surprise, she was intrigued. "It's risky, Mark," she said, her brow furrowed. "But if you can pull it off, it could be groundbreaking." And just like that, the Cardboard King was born, stripped bare. The preparation was meticulous. Mark donated all his clothes to charity, keeping only a worn-out pair of jeans, a t-shirt, a faded hoodie, and a pair of battered sneakers. He shaved his head and stopped showering for a week to achieve the required disheveled look. He learned about the city's soup kitchens, shelters, and the safe spots where the homeless congregated. He emptied his bank account, keeping only a few dollars for emergencies and depositing the rest into a trusted friend's account. He gave his phone to his sister, promising to contact her only in dire situations. He wanted the experience to be as authentic as possible. There would be no safety net. The first night was the hardest. The cold seeped into his bones, despite the layers of clothing. The noise of the city, sirens, car horns, shouting, was amplified at street level, a constant assault on his senses. He found a relatively quiet alleyway and huddled in a cardboard box, trying to ignore the gnawing hunger in his stomach and the overwhelming fear that coiled in his gut. He missed his comfortable bed, his warm showers, the simple luxury of a cup of coffee. He missed his life. But he told himself it was only for a few weeks. He could endure it. He had to endure it. For the story. The school of hard knocks. Days turned into weeks. Mark quickly learned the brutal realities of life on the streets. He was constantly hungry, relying on the meagre portions provided by soup kitchens or the occasional handout from a sympathetic stranger. He learned to be wary of everyone, to keep his head down and avoid eye contact. He saw the desperation in the eyes of the other homeless people, the constant struggle for survival. He witnessed petty thefts, desperate arguments, and the quiet despair that settled over them like a shroud. He met people from all walks of life, veterans haunted by their past, addicts battling their demons, families who had lost everything in the economic downturn. He made a few tentative friends, Sarah, a young woman with a bright smile and a story of domestic abuse that made his blood run cold. Old Joe, a grizzled Vietnam vet who shared his wisdom and showed him the best places to find discarded food. They became his teachers, his guides in this strange and unforgiving world. But even in their camaraderie, there was a constant undercurrent of tension, a sense that everyone was looking out for themselves because nobody else would. The descent. The longer Mark stayed on the streets, the harder it became to hold on to his former self. The dirt and grime seemed to seep into his soul. The constant hunger and lack of sleep eroded his mental and physical strength. He started to lose hope. He began to understand how easy it was to fall into addiction. The temporary escape offered by drugs and alcohol was a powerful lure, a way to numb the pain and the fear. He saw people he knew and respected succumb to the temptation, their lives spiraling further out of control. One particularly cold and rainy night, Mark found himself shivering uncontrollably, his body aching with exhaustion. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the gnawing hunger was unbearable. An old man offered him a swig from a bottle of cheap liquor. Mark hesitated, then took a long, desperate gulp. The burning sensation in his throat was followed by a wave of warmth that spread through his body. For a brief moment, the pain subsided. That was his first taste. Crossing the line, Mark managed to avoid a full-blown addiction, but the experience changed him. He became more withdrawn, more cynical, more like the people he was writing about. He started to lie, to cheat, to do whatever it took to survive. He stole food, panhandled aggressively, and even considered selling his body for money. He'd lost sight of his original goal. The story, the exposé, the desire to make a difference. It all seemed distant and irrelevant. He was just trying to survive. One day, while rummaging through a dumpster, he found a discarded wallet. Inside, there was $100 bill and several credit cards. His first instinct was to turn it over to the police, but then he thought about the hunger, the cold, the endless struggle. He thought about Sarah, who desperately needed medication. He took the money. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. He knew he had crossed a line. He was no longer an observer. He was part of the problem. The journalist was dead, replaced by a desperate survivor. Seeing the rescue and its aftermath. After 3 months, Mark finally reached out to his sister. He was a shadow of his former self, gaunt, dirty, and emotionally shattered. She was horrified by his appearance and immediately took him back to her apartment. A hot shower, a warm meal, and a comfortable bed couldn't erase the memories, the experiences, the guilt. He felt alien in his sister's clean, orderly world. He couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong there anymore. He tried to write the story, but the words wouldn't come. He was too close to it, too tainted by the experience. He couldn't separate himself from the people he had lived with, the people he had become. Mrs. Davis, initially enthusiastic about the project, grew concerned about Mark's mental state. She pulled the plug on the story and urged him to seek therapy. The unraveling. Mark tried to return to his old life, but he couldn't. He couldn't stand the superficiality of his former friends, the comfortable ignorance of the privileged. He was haunted by the faces of the homeless people he had left behind, especially Sarah and old Joe. He quit his job at the Chronicle. He couldn't bring himself to write anymore, to pretend that he was still the idealistic journalist he once was. He felt like a fraud. He started drinking heavily, trying to numb the pain, the guilt, the memories. He pushed away his friends and family, isolating himself in his apartment. he was slowly unraveling. One night, in a drunken stupor, he went back to the streets. He wandered through the familiar alleyways, searching for Sarah and old Joe. He found them, but they were different. Sarah was even more gaunt and desperate, her bright smile replaced by a hardened cynicism. Old Joe was even more withdrawn and quiet, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. They barely recognized him. Rock bottom. Mark's life spiraled out of control. He lost his apartment, his friends, his family. He became the very thing he had set out to study, a homeless person. He spent his days panhandling, drinking, and drifting through the city. He was a ghost, a shadow of his former self. The only difference between him and the other homeless people was that he knew what he had lost. One cold winter night, he found himself huddled in a doorway, shivering and alone. He was sick, hungry, and utterly defeated. He thought about giving up, about simply closing his eyes and letting the cold take him. But then he remembered Sarah and old Joe. He remembered their stories, their struggles, their resilience. He realized that he couldn't give up. He owed it to them and to himself to find a way back. Superman, the long climb back. The road to recovery was long and arduous. Mark checked himself into a rehabilitation center and began the slow process of healing. He attended therapy sessions, confronted his demons, and learned to forgive himself. He reconnected with his family and friends, apologizing for his behavior and asking for their forgiveness. He started volunteering at a homeless shelter, using his experience to help others. It took years, but Mark eventually rebuilt his life. He never returned to journalism, but he found a new purpose in helping the homeless. He became an advocate, a voice for the voiceless. He dedicated his life to raising awareness and fighting for change. He never forgot his time on the streets, the lessons he learned, the mistakes he made. He carried the scars with him, a constant reminder of the darkness he had faced and the resilience he had found within himself. A different kind of story. Years later, Mark finally wrote his story. Not the sensational exposé he had originally envisioned, but a more honest and introspective account of his experience. He wrote about the brutality of homelessness, the systemic failures that perpetuate it, and the human cost of indifference. But he also wrote about the resilience, the compassion, and the hope that he had found on the streets. He wrote about Sarah and old Joe and all the other forgotten people he had met. He told their stories, giving them a voice that they had never had before. His book, The Cardboard King, A Confession, became a bestseller. It sparked a national conversation about homelessness and inspired people to take action. Mark became a leading voice in the fight against poverty and inequality. He never fully recovered from his experience, but he found redemption in using his pain to help others. He learned that true strength comes not from avoiding suffering, but from embracing it, learning from it, and using it to create a better world. Moral of the story. The story of Mark serves as a powerful reminder that good intentions are not enough. While his initial desire to expose the plight of the homeless was noble, his methods were flawed and ultimately destructive. The experience taught him that true understanding requires empathy, respect, and a genuine connection with the people you are trying to help. More importantly, it highlights the dangers of romanticizing suffering and the importance of maintaining your own well-being when trying to make a difference. Sometimes the most effective way to effect change is not by immersing yourself in the problem, but by standing outside it and using your voice to advocate for those who are suffering. The true moral of the story is that empathy without boundaries can be destructive, and that lasting change requires a commitment to both personal well-being and social justice.